So there is an argument against God's ability to create, meaning to actualize any specific possible worlds, that I find to be fairly strong and that I take quite seriously. So the basis of this argument is the plausible intuition that God can actualize an infinite amount of distinct state of affairs. So, in other words, there are infinitely many distinct possible creations. We obviously distinguish between creation and possible worlds. Leibniz held that God may create one of a set of distinct possible worlds, yet that's not strictly speaking accurate, at least to the modern analytical understanding of what a possible world is, since God, according to this understanding, is part of a possible world, namely the actual world. He doesn't create it, he just actualizes a possible world. Meaning by the act of creation, God shapes the actual world in a way that it becomes identical to some previously merely possible world. So, just for fun, we can define the term actualization in this context as the act of causally initiating a transition of the actual world W to the identity of the actual world with some possible world W1. So with this in mind, let's come to the argument, which is inspired by Howard Sobel's argument in Logic and Theism, which can be formalized as follows. 1. There is a better world than this one, i.e. the world is a bettered world. 2. That the world is a bettered world is incompatible with the existence of a perfect being. 3. There does not exist a perfect being. This argument can be modified in a way that more clearly spells out and focuses on the necessary fact that for any possible world there may be a better one. 1 star. Necessarily, for any possible world Wn, there is some possible world Wn plus 1 that is axiologically superior. 2 star. The existence of some possible world that is axiologically superior to the actual world is incompatible with the existence of a perfect being. 3 star. There does not exist a perfect being. Now, given A2, it seems that the supposed incompatibility between the existence of some possible world that is better than the actual world and God's existence is supposed to be grounded by an ethical conflict between God's supposed duty to create a perfect, unimprovable circumstance and the existence of a possible world better than the actual world. But as a merely ethical proposition, 2 might be false for the reason that ought implies can, meaning one's duties can only consist of things that one is actually capable of fulfilling. So let's put it like that. 1. It's a moral obligation for God not to actualize a world Wn if there is some possible world Wn plus 1 that is axiologically superior to Wn. 2. Necessarily, for any possible world Wn, there is some possible world Wn plus 1 that is axiologically superior. 3. An agent S can have a moral obligation to do X if and only if it's possible for S to do X. So from 2 and 3 we get 4. Necessarily, it's not a moral obligation for God not to actualize a world Wn if there is some possible world Wn plus 1 that is axiologically superior to Wn. In other words, 1 is necessarily false. So it seems the argument is easily defeated. If God cannot create a best of all possible worlds, because there simply isn't any, then there isn't any ethical problem and God is off the hook. But what if we turn from ethical reasons to broadly prudential reasons? What if we target the element of rationality itself? What if there were an infinite amount of distinct boxes, each one with a certain number of coins in them, and for each box there is one with more coins inside? Additionally, there is some operating system with 2 goals. 1. Pick one and only one box and take the coins. 2. Maximize the number of coins you get from picking the box. So suppose the system is perfectly aware of the number of coins inside each of the boxes. Which one is it going to choose? Well, none. It simply cannot make a quote-unquote rational decision based on its 2 imperatives, since for every box there are infinitely many ones with more coins inside. It could make a random choice and simply select a random box, but that's about it. Now, could it make a good choice, in the sense of picking a good box that contains a lot of coins, even if there are infinitely many ones with more ones? Well, I bet that nobody can point out what a good box is and what the amount of coins is that should be considered many. So there just is no prudence-based decision that can be made. It's just not possible. Now, my argument is broadly analogical. 1. For every possible world Wn that God can actualize, there is some possible world Wn plus 1 that's axiologically superior. 2. If for every possible option n, there is some option n plus 1 that dominates, there is no perfectly rational basis for choosing any option n. 3. If God were to actualize any specific possible world Wn, God's choice wouldn't be perfectly rational. 4. Necessarily, any of God's choices is perfectly rational. 5. God cannot choose to actualize any possible world Wn. Now, 1 and 2 are obviously controversial, but I can see some people denying 4 as well, and yet I believe all of them are easily rationally acceptable. Now, given broad statistical independence, which is plausible, the chain rule states that the product of the respective epistemic probabilities of the three premises should be the determining factor for the strength of this argument. But I think one could hold that each of these premises is relatively certain. And since something like 09 cubed is still approximately 07, I conclude that the argument can be fairly strong. Now let's discuss premise 1. Is there a set of best possible worlds, a threshold of maximal axiological value, a set of absolute characteristics that make a possible world in some sense perfect and not possibly improvable? Well, I myself once argued for the possibility of there being at least one best of all possible worlds, and I tried to be analytically precise. I argued that all broadly positive circumstances can be combined into a single possible world unless they are strictly mutually exclusive. But then, one alternative is going to be better than the other, otherwise the respective worlds would be equally valuable. And yet, there are very many questionable assumptions to be made and very many problems with such a view, so the idea that there cannot be any best of all possible worlds is fairly well rationally justifiable. Additionally, there is a vast amount of empirical data that strongly suggests that this is likely not a best of all possible worlds. So we come to 2, and 2 to me seems very likely true. In the light of the existence of an infinite array of superior choices, what characteristic of some option would ground a rational basis for some specific choice, without implying that this specific choice dominates all the other choices based on these criteria, which it by definition does not? I guess that a perfectly rational agent couldn't make a perfectly rational decision given these circumstances, so I'd probably accept this premise. Now this brings us to 4, which I'd probably accept since God, as a perfectly rational agent, can't really actualize a specific possible world based on non-prudential reasons. And God deciding which world to create on the basis of some fair infinite dice throw is inconceivable to me. Possibly though there could be a lower threshold of worlds which God deems good enough, and maybe there could be a random element within creation, but it's really not theologically attractive. So this to me seems like a fairly strong argument.